Hi everyone, how are you? This is Meaghan with you, and I would like to welcome you all to this key session today that we're having, that is on Islamic FinTech session, and we'll be doing a lot of deep dives with these four experts here, which I will be introducing to you shortly. But before I do that, I would like to introduce myself to you. My name is Namir Khan, and I chair the MENA FinTech Association, which is operating and working in close collaboration with the regulators, with the local bodies across the region in the 22 countries that we have in the Arab world. Now, before I continue, on behalf of the VFF team, Virtual FinTech Forum team, of the FAIR team, I would like to basically offer the condolences to the recent tragedy that we had in the region in Beirut yesterday. So condolences to everyone who's basically there, and of course, your friends, family, and I hope they all are safe and in good health. Now, with this, I would like to now move on towards the next bit, which is introduction of our key people over here that we have who have taken out their key time and agreed to share their key insights with us. So I would like you all to basically please get introduced with number one, Meaghan Johnson. Meaghan, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you to everyone for inviting me to this event. It's super exciting. So my name is Meaghan Johnson. I am the founder of Digital Mags, where I work with banks and fintechs and other organizations in the area of strategic research, specifically around product and service development, and working closely with companies to understand their customers' needs, and how that can fuel into proper and successful product and service development. I'm also a marketing advisor to Vacuum Labs, based in the CEE region of Europe. And just a quick note, we will be partnering with Maher in launching a white paper on Islamic banking and fintech at the end of this month. So thank you again for having me.
Fantastic, interesting developments. And I would now move to Sulaiman. Sulaiman, could you please introduce yourself? Yeah.
Thank you, Namir. Thank you, Mushir and the host for having me. Pleasure to be here. I am the founder of 8 Point Capital. We are an investment company focused on cross-border opportunities between Asia and the Middle East, specifically in the area of tech. My background is in investment banking, Islamic finance, and private equity. And I look forward to having this discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Raheel, your introduction over here.
Thank you, Mushir and Namir, for this opportunity. I'm the managing partner at Codebase Technologies. Codebase Technologies is a long-standing open API banking solutions provider. We work with traditional banks, helping them go digital, as well as with the new emerging fintech ecosystem of challenger banks, neobanks. We've been working with startups, specifically in the fintech space, both in MENA region and Asia Pacific, and helping them actually try to integrate within the banking and the overall financial ecosystem. So thank you for having me, and we look forward for a very good discussion today.
Fantastic. And the last person that we wanted to have today is Maher Loubieh, who's the co-founder of Hala, one of the leading fintechs that we have in the MENA region. Unfortunately, since he's based in Beirut, he's not able to make it today because of the situation. Now, let's jump onto the topic over here. I mean, you must have already heard this many a times in multiple sessions that we have had before. There's that what pressure that the fintechs have faced globally across the globe during this entire pandemic and the COVID situation that we have had altogether. We have had investment issues. We have had product tweaking. We have had business model tweaking as well. A lot of startups have struggled to keep up with the pace. A lot of fintechs have struggled to keep up with the pace, and some have fared really very well. Some have raised a lot of money as well. At the same time, we have seen many fintechs taking the exit route as well by not continuing. So, and a lot of new things are also emerging as well, which also includes the likes of AML and KYC issues as well that we have recently seen with the major giants as well. Now, Islamic FinTech is no different. Why? Because Islamic FinTech is something that is once again catering to a very huge global population of Muslims all over the world, number one. And number two is that it also caters to not just Muslims, but of course the audience that is beyond Muslims as well. So working in the region and operating in the region myself, I can see a lot of people are banking over here in our region with multiple Islamic banks, and I'm sure it's no different in Southeast Asia or in the European part of the world where this trend is picking up more and more and more. Now, with this, the important thing to understand over here, I mean, since I've had this background in the Islamic finance side as well, is that Islamic finance was always ripe for fintech innovation, always ripe for it. It was asking for it, it was demanding it since the very beginning. But it's just that the recent push of fintech had surfaced them and pushed them to go towards the transformation. But this recent episode that we have had in the past 4 or 5 months has really changed the game by having no other option but to actually adapt to the new way of working, which is working with fintechs or working like them or being one itself. Meaghan, coming to you, I mean, you have been doing a lot of research on this point as well. My question to you is that right now we have like around 142 fintechs globally, which is, I must say, feeble versus the global number of fintechs that we have all over the world. But for you, what has been the impact on the Islamic fintech landscape in the MENA region or the broader region as well, during this entire 4, 5, 6 months that we have seen?
Yeah, I think that all fintechs are, as you mentioned, kind of in a very tricky position. I think that specifically thinking about some of the Islamic banking fintechs in Europe, plans for further expansion and product development are certainly on hold, I think, due to the uncertainty. And I think, as with a lot of fintechs and banks, I think there's a lot of introspection and thinking, okay, how can we focus on our core product? And, rather than going down a complete route of, highly innovative products and services, what can we do to fix the basics, re-engage with our customers? And something we're seeing across the board from both traditional banks, fintechs, across kind of any sort of niche segment or segment, is a renewed focus on customer support and servicing customers during these times. So I think it's, again, instead of focusing on what's this highly new innovative feature, how can we truly be there to support our customers through this time?
So I mean, since you've been doing a lot of research on this, have you seen non-Islamic or countries and Islam? I mean, so there has been upward trend, right? But do you see adoption coming in from non-Islamic countries as well?
I think, definitely pre-COVID, there has been
this is in perspective to Islamic FinTech. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think pre-COVID, there's definitely a lot more interest and players we're seeing in the Islamic FinTech space within Europe. I think that, from my perspective, it's interesting because I think that a lot of the offerings from Islamic FinTech, specifically, like in Insha, the component around Islamic banking and around sustainable investments, I think that's definitely a broader trend we're seeing across all of Europe. And I think that, if the likes of Insha and some Islamic FinTechs can really develop a strong proposition in creating digitally focused, sustainable investment solutions and offerings, then it's going to win the hearts and minds of, people regardless of faith.
So very important point that you just mentioned, sustainable finance and then Islamic FinTech. Would you relate the two? And because then that can really create a bigger proposition and a better proposition and a better landscape altogether. So would you plug them together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I look at Insha and, they have so many interesting propositions and features and services that are, targeted towards the Muslim community here, specifically, I think with the Turkish diaspora, a solution that allows its users to find their nearest mosque, and the calculators and everything. And I think that it will be interesting to see to what extent, as they continue to evolve the product and expand and who they're targeting, do they go for the young digitally savvy segment, which may not have the same level of faith as the older generation, which may not be as digitally savvy, and to what extent are they kind of targeting and positioning their sustainable investment solutions to the non-fintech community. So I think that Islamic fintechs are in a pretty unique position in the sense that they have multiple customer segments with different needs and different levels of kind of digital maturity.
So basically what you're saying is that we're heading towards, the offering that you have. I'll come down to this point when I'll be asking you more about what's being offered, but it's more heading towards value-based services being given to, or faith-based value-added services, I must say, that are being offered by the platform itself. Raheel, coming to you, since you have been working closely on the open banking landscape itself, now open banking is going mainstream for sure. Now, does this create an opportunity for Islamic fintechs that you see at this point of time? And if you do, then what are some of the key areas where Islamic fintechs could contribute strongly, not just contribute?
So see, open banking in our region, yes, definitely it opens up a complete new perspective, and not just for Islamic, but every fintech actually in the region. Islamic perspective, yes, because there are a lot of Islamic banks in this region who are still new to their digital transformation agenda. So they have not done as well as their conventional counterparts when it goes to digital transformation. So there is a much bigger opportunity for Islamic fintechs or fintechs who have specialization, who have the understanding of Islamic finance, who can come and help these banks and these financial ecosystem partners basically utilize the benefit of open banking. So, however, open banking from MENA region, definitely it has to get a push from the regulators. We've seen a live example in Bahrain, which was where the regulator enforced it religiously with these institutions, and they have seen everyone picking up that infrastructure. So infrastructure is ready. Example in Bahrain, UAE should be looking at similarly, Saudi should be looking at similarly, and so forth overall in the MENA region. But Islamic fintechs have a huge opportunity because today, with the pandemic in our hindsight, has opened up, all Islamic banks are lagging behind the digital agenda. And that is, everyone knows about it. So there is a quite number of opportunities available in the market where these fintechs can come with, because they bring in the agility. They may not bring two exotic products. They would want to basically support the given infrastructure of the Islamic banks, help them move into digital space.
So Raheel, would you differ your engagement with a conventional bank of a fintech to a relationship with an Islamic, Islamic bank itself? Over here, what I'm talking about is, as you're mentioning, the strategy dealing with an Islamic fintech over here in the region, the Islamic bank of a fintech to engage with the bank over here would be such that it's more towards uplifting their existing game because they have not been up to the mark, right? That's one way of engagement. And the second engagement, if they're having it with a conventional bank, it's going to be far more different, is it?
Yes, definitely. And you need to understand, Islamic banking industry has its own needs and its own challenges. And the fintechs have to acknowledge that. So fintechs can actually enhance, that is one. But if fintechs wants to go directly into the market as a B2C proposition, they can easily do that as well. And they need to have that background of Islamic finance. There are a lot of faith-based institutions who wants to focus on that market, but they fail when it comes to getting to the mass market. So the MENA region, the operatability, you can say, the target market is there, but what about the accessibility? Can a startup access those markets? The regulatory regime is a bit stricter and still closed environment in the MENA region. So until that opens up, just like Europe has done, there will be certain things where the fintechs have to participate and collaborate with the institutions themselves. Hence, in the MENA region, our focus has been on collaboration. So we advise our fintechs and our banking customers to basically look for collaborative model rather than a competitive model.
Makes absolute sense, and this highlights the overall opportunity, as you're saying. It's not just basically from one single angle. I think the important thing to see is that when you're looking at an Islamic fintech, that also includes insurance too, which is takaful.
Yes.
Right. So
overall
one is the banking
platform.
opportunity. One is the banking opportunity, and the second is the takaful opportunity as well that you see all together. And which, when we're talking about opportunity, that makes me come to Sulaiman now. The Sulaiman, I mean, from an investment perspective, because that's your key domain itself. I mean, MENA has been lately, and for the past couple of years, I must say, has been a buzzing point for investors. Now, with leading investments that have been primarily going into fintech, that have been coming into the region, if you do see an opportunity in Islamic fintech yourself as an investor, why do you see that in the first place? Because then, of course, we have a very broad and global audience over here who would like to understand from an investor's perspective, why is there an opportunity? And number two, is the market large enough?
Yeah, so I agree with the previous comments that Islamic finance is a big opportunity, but I don't think the opportunity here is in Islamic. That is increasingly table stakes. The real opportunity is in how you engage the consumer, understanding your consumer's needs, the offering that you provide in terms of the UX, UI, how you acquire those customers. It was mentioned earlier that there's potentially two types of demographics. Although the overall Muslim population skews young, there's obviously an older generation that is more faith-based in their engagements. Whereas the younger population, even the millennial generation, they do retain a high degree of faith, but they express it very differently. And for them, they will pick up the digital product that is more tuned into their needs, and that is good UI, good UX. Does it offer them other bells and whistles? I mean, Meaghan talked about Qibla, prayer times. Those are things that at times are an afterthought for Islamic finance institutions.
Because it's limiting yourself.
It's very limiting, and it doesn't allow, if from an investor standpoint, what we're looking at is points of aggregation. How are you going to aggregate the largest number of consumers and reduce your cost of acquisition over time, right? And the focus has been, as of late, too much on the product and less on the consumer. So we like to see opportunities that are focused on addressing what the consumer needs are and how are they going to create points of aggregation to increase wallet share of the consumer over time as they aggregate that user base.
So this brings me to this point. So this is an opportunity. At the same time, this is a very, I must say, a small window of opportunity, because that could close down as well. Because what you're saying
and the reality is it's an opportunity open to both Islamic institutions and non-Islamic institutions.
Correct. So basically, the consumer at this point of time is more centric to the experience versus focusing more on faith. However, what Islamic fintechs have an opportunity at this point of time is an adaptive and open customer who is looking forward to get the right experiences regardless of where or she gets it from. Correct? I mean, was I able to sum it up correctly?
Correct. And I do believe that the consumer, given both options, assuming they're both equal in experience, in cost, will, in most cases, if they are faith-based in how they make their decisions, will choose the Islamic option. But if the Islamic option is of inferior quality, they will go for the alternative.
Now, the interesting thing over here I would like to share with the audience is going to be that what's the opportunity in terms of numbers? We always discuss this, right? So in the MENA region, we're looking into a population of 380 million people. Smartphone penetration stands at 76, mobile phone 110%. One of the youngest population in the world regionally, average age of around 22 at the moment, right? And the financial inclusion rate in the region stands at a dismal 15%, and insurance and penetration stands at life insurance in specific stands at 0.67% and accumulatively 3.8%, including the normal insurance too. And that includes, countries such as Saudi and UAE, where the insurance angle is mandatory. So this is just identifying a huge opportunity where we have young population who is very well adaptive to new propositions itself. Meaghan, coming back to you, I mean, what's your advice to investors following the point of Sulaiman? What's your advice to the investors for the MENA opportunity itself, number one, and how can the MENA region learn from the success of fintechs in EU, in the European part of the world, and of course, the Asian-based fintechs?
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with Sulaiman, and we need to start thinking about the customers rather than the products. I think my advice would be for any fintechs looking to play in this space and in the MENA region is, I think to an extent it doesn't matter on the region. It's you need to be speaking to your customers and understanding where their challenges are in their day-to-day finances, whether it be a consumer in the business space, what are the day-to-day challenges of running your business. And it doesn't need to be a year-long research program. You can run kind of, lean research testing where you spend, 30 minutes speaking to customers and just getting a sense of what keeps them up at night. And really using that to fuel your product and service development. I think far too often across fintech and traditional banking, regardless of who they're targeting, they build a product with their thinking of this is what I think the customers want without actually speaking to the customers. And then, down the line, it causes them more time and resources and money in terms of iteration and then revisiting if the product or service doesn't necessarily fit to the market. I think back to the point, it's thinking about things like, if the average age, is 22 years old in the MENA region, I'm sure a 22-year-old would be more enticed with a product or platform that integrates with a TikTok rather than that brings in, a traditional boring savings account. So how can you kind of cater to the nuances of the customer segment in creating your product or service development? And I think what can be learned from Europe in particular, if a fintech is looking to play in multiple markets, I think it's absolutely key to understand that each market has its own nuances. So, I look at an N26 and they've essentially launched a blanket product across most European countries. And, I think German consumers are very different from UK consumers, which are very different from Dutch consumers, and how they, think about finances and, even to an extent their level of digital engagement and card usage and everything. So I think it's really just, thinking deeply about the customer and thinking about the nuances of the particular market.
Very interesting. I mean, my next question is like to Raheel and Sulaiman, to both of you, is like, speaking of Saudi itself, which is the largest market here. I mean, there are a couple of large markets over here, which is Saudi and Egypt, right? Two of the markets that we, look forward towards because of the huge size and population in the market itself, right? So there has been an uptick in investment activity, not just fintechs, but I must say holistically when it comes to startups. Now, how is this? I mean, what are the startups doing as per you in this part of the world to raise investments, right? Number one. And number two, what approach do VCs have at present and other investment vehicles? I mean, what are they basically adopting differently?
Happy to start.
Please, yeah.
So maybe just step back 1 second and maybe tie this into your last question. I think it's important when one looks at MENA, and there's a tendency to see it as a homogeneous region. Yes, 380 million people, perhaps shared by a common language, some commonality in faith, and potentially culture. However, the region as a whole is largely fragmented. And the way we like to look at it is in two parts: the fat head of the GCC, that is where you have the bulk of, let's say, the wealth, a smaller population relative to the rest of MENA, but higher ARPU and spend per person. And then the long tail, which is the rest of MENA. where you have the size of the population, yet digitally native, similar to the GCC, but lower purchasing power. And it's important when one looks at MENA is to think about these two things, because new companies entering MENA or companies growing out of MENA, the initial assumption is that we can capture the whole region. But once they start going, they realize that's a lot harder than they thought. So that's I think the first point. Yes, today there's obviously a lot of excitement around Saudi, around Egypt. Saudi in particular, maybe I'll address, given that I'm here currently, there is a lot of funding coming in by the government, and that's bringing in additional capital from the private sector. The government here has set up two vehicles that invest both in funds and directly into fintech and other companies. And that is to the tune of around $2 billion to be invested over a 10-year period of time. One is run out of the PIF, owned by the PIF, called Jeddah, and the other one is owned by the small to medium enterprises called Saudi VC, or Saudi Venture Capital Company. So that is creating a lot of opportunity for companies here to start thinking about, or entrepreneurs here to start thinking about starting their own companies and having readily available capital to potentially invest in them. Now, the challenge remains that for the private sector to really buy into the story. And that's going to come with time. That's going to come with examples. That's going to come with exits. That's going to come with new rounds at higher valuations. And that will ultimately be a function of just how well the ecosystem performs over the next 3 to 5 years.
So, I mean, Raheel, you have a point to make?
Yes, just adding on to what Sulaiman mentioned. We have seen some investment activities, but as he said, it's a fragmented market. You cannot compare $2 billion from Saudi when you see MENA region on a whole. So a lot of work needs to be still done on an infrastructure level when it comes to investments to support the fintechs in the region. Yes, it is very difficult for startups to look at MENA as a one consolidated market. Fragmented approach to the market, financial markets themselves, regulatory regimes are very different. Even moving from Bahrain to Saudi is very different. Bahrain to Oman is very different. So yes, these markets have to be addressed differently. But our focus when it comes to investments, through basically we also invest in startups using our CVC arm. What we see in these startups is they should be focusing on the customer, as Meaghan mentioned, not the product. Product, everyone knows, product is already out there. We need to see how they can actually aggregate or mass accumulate the base required for them to be sustainable. That's the area, and we then don't differentiate that whether it's an Islamic or it's non-Islamic. We look at how you can engage your customers on a broader market, and wherever we have invested and people had their focus on Islamic markets, specifically or Islamic segments, we have advised them to go for an ethical segment rather than calling it as Islamic segment, which opens up a bigger addressable market. And for us to invest in them, we need that. Unless we get that larger population base available, we would not be in a position from a private sector perspective to invest in such startups.
That's a very interesting point. Both of you had highlighted, Sulaiman and Raheel, which is on fragmentation, right? And basically expanding from, let's say, even Bahrain to Saudi or any of these countries is difficult because of the different financial markets that we have and how they differ, and even the policies are differing. I mean, one thing I can say, I mean, working closely with the regulators, there's a lot of development happening on the regional level. So there is good news, but I can't say. But the point is that there is good news in the form that the regulators regionally have come together and they are actually building up frameworks to ensure that there is an element of passporting that enables a fintech or a technology company to basically move easily around the region via the passporting element that is being now going to be further concretized as we move ahead. Now, regulation is the discussion that I was just basically coming down towards, is the fragmentation. So I mean, Raheel, since you're talking about this, Mike, so what are the bottlenecks that you see that have been, I would say, impediments for Islamic fintech space regionally? And if there are those bottlenecks, what is the support that can be either provided to the Islamic fintechs, number one? Number two, what Islamic fintechs need to do. So not only you only have to look in for support, that's fine, given, but what do you need to do yourself as an Islamic fintech? Now I'm talking about Islamic fintechs who are successfully operating in, in the West and in the East. So what is different that they have to do when they are basically coming towards the region?
See, from a regulatory standpoint, it's equal for both conventional and Islamic fintech. So there's no difference, because regulators, one thing they have done well is whenever they come up with new regulations, they come up with both the aspects of the market. So they address both. The regulation are for both. And we've seen in Bahrain as well, when they came up with open banking or they came up with the crowdfunding rules, they came for both the segments. So from that perspective, it's okay. But overall, as we said, fragmented affairs of the regulatory bodies is a huge challenge. If I'm doing open banking in Bahrain, the same does not apply in UAE. I'm doing eKYC in Bahrain is a completely different model to UAE itself. So those things have to be sit down together. And as you mentioned, the regional regulators are actually trying to create that common framework for not just from passporting perspective, but from even how do they look at developing their markets. If you go back to Europe, see how PSD2 and open banking survived or flourished was or the whole European region coming to a consensus and not putting that burden of regulatory requirements on each country or each fintechs operating in each country. So that is I think the regulatory challenges are there. The regulators need to open up. They are opening up, but still it's a long way for them to basically support the overall industry in this region at least.
So when it comes to fintechs, right? So I mean, we have regulatory issues, but the consumer is still open for products, propositions, newer business models. How do you, I mean, so in your perspective, since you are working closely with the banks and working on the integrations and opening up the infrastructure, how do you see these international fintechs, Islamic fintechs that, like I said, operating from either in the Southeast or in the West, if they were to expand into the region, if they were to step into the region, what is that they need to do to be able to operate? I mean, that could be either number one, the selection of the country that you are looking into, on what basis do we need to do that. Second could be, in terms of the regulatory areas, do they need to consider a sandbox, a well-defined sandbox that they need to consider while they are stepping into the region? So what are those top 3 things that you would recommend?
So for international fintechs who would like to come into the MENA region, they should be looking at progressive banks as their partners, first of all. Without a banking partner, you will not be able to even move towards that accumulation of mass public. So looking at a partner, sandbox, yes, a lot of regional central banks have opened up a sandbox environment, which is helping to attract both regional and outside the region fintechs to come over here. However, what they need to see is how they can actually make a critical change for the bank or for the market they're addressing. It cannot be a standalone what we've seen in the prepaid card market in the Europe. It will not work over here. Things have to be changed. It has to be looked at from the region's consumer needs. So consumer needs have to be looked at as the primary thing. How do you address that? And then basically the challenges comes later. So if you have that mass public appeal, then the MENA region is a very good region to basically come.
So Sulaiman, so same question, a similar question to you, right? So if there have been bottlenecks in this space, how has some of the leading Islamic fintechs that you have been studying responded to it globally, or if any regionally? And have you seen any regulators supporting any of those fintechs? And if yes, then how have they been doing that?
Yeah, I don't know the direct answer to that question. The sample
Okay.
size is yet too small when you look at Islamic fintechs. But if I may, Namir, I'll approach it slightly differently and just say that, I mean, there's a tendency to create categories when looking at digital opportunities. And here we're saying fintech, Islamic, which is good because it helps push progress. But one of the issues with that is that it creates a lot of silos and does not allow us to then think about, okay, what happens outside of that space. So if I look at, for example, China, right? China, Alibaba started as an e-commerce player, and Financial today is a $200 billion institution that came out of Alibaba. So the question for me is, will the next Islamic so-called fintech in the region be a bank, or will it be another aggregator in the form of e-commerce? Is it Uber and Careem? Will they start offering banking products? Is it Noon? Grab in Southeast Asia is already offering banking products. So we must also stay open and cognizant of the fact that Islamic banking, going back to the Bill Gates line, we don't need banks, but we still need banking, right? Will Islamic banking necessarily be limited to banks, or will it come from other aggregators? And the beauty of digital is that once you've aggregated demand, you can offer your customers a lot of things beyond what you've initially started off doing.
Brilliant. No, this makes sense. And with this, I mean, I will link this question to Meaghan now. Meaghan, like, at the same time, I mean, when you look into the competitive space, why do you think, I mean, connecting this answer from Sulaiman, why do you think traditional Islamic banks have struggled to play in the fintech space largely? One, right? Because, I mean, Sulaiman, I was just thinking when you were speaking, maybe have an Islamic super app. You won't be surprised you would have that very soon.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So basically, why are banks still struggling in the space when it comes to?
And what does that super app look like?
Yeah, that's really
interesting. Is it a banking app, or to Meaghan's point, is it acquired through TikTok, or how does that come about?
So that's one part. And then if there have been roadblocks or impediments in number one, have you seen any strong collaborations? And number two, if not, then, and if you have seen some, but there must be some that you would have wished for, what would they be that you feel would actually create a very sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, to the point of the super app in the MENA region, to an extent, like the more I think about it, the more I feel that perhaps the opportunity and time has passed to see this type of independent fintech and challenger bank revolution we're seeing in Europe and MENA. And maybe it's a case of just leapfrogging straight into the super app for the region, and, you know, following a more of a China model rather than kind of the European model with fintech. I think, you know, from what I see in Europe and from what I experienced in the UK, like, the regulator is the biggest driver towards innovation and the opening up of the market, making it easier for non-traditional players to play in the space. That's the biggest catalyst or blocker for, you know, development in the space. And I think that, you know, without that strong fintech and challenger bank presence, there's no real incentive for traditional banks, whether they be Islamic traditional banks or normal traditional banks, to really, you know, innovate and create new solutions. You know, we see the traditional banks of specifically Europe going down this more kind of innovative digital route, specifically because of, you know, the fintechs, the challengers, and also the changing customer expectations and experiences driven from Amazon, Facebook, Uber, all these companies. And sorry, what was the last question about the sweet spot?
So basically, I mean, the collaborations that we have, right? So what sort of collaborations do you foresee need to happen that would really create a very compelling product itself when it comes to Islamic FinTech? As you guys just mentioned right now, that, you know, there needs to be more to it rather than just offering a faith-based product, right? I mean, what sort of collaboration? You mentioned TikTok, for example. Is there any collaboration that you see for the Islamic FinTechs or the banks itself that you feel that if this sort of a collaboration is created or on a similar, on a similar line, this may create a compelling proposition that may compel not just Muslims, but
Yeah.
the non-Muslim audience as well to basically do a trial on the product?
Yeah, I think there needs to be more collaboration, not necessarily in the kind of like front end customer facing side and not necessarily in the hyperback in the core banking, but kind of in this middle space. So partnerships where that allows banks and fintechs and financial institutions to utilize the data of their customers and provide them with personalized, contextualized, relevant services, you know. And I think that is irrespective of whether it's Islamic banking or traditional banking, or, you know, a banking product that's targeted for people that want to focus on sustainability. I think the sweet spot and the gap is definitely this personalized experience that's using like the vast amount of data that banks have. So I think the ideal collaboration will come kind of in that middle space within the entire kind of banking ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Meaghan, and thank you so much, Raheel, and of course, Sulaiman. Just before we wrap up quickly, we have space for one question, 2 minutes left, and that is to Sulaiman, which is by Fajr. So I mean, the question that we have from Fajr is that what key products and services are being offered differently among fintechs using Islamic laws and common laws?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Great. So
I'll open it to the rest of the panelists. Maybe somebody has a better answer.
Anyone? Raheel, Meaghan?
Can you repeat?
So the question is that what are key products and services differences that are offered among fintech using Islamic laws and common laws?
Okay, so basically, when it comes to the Islamic laws and the common law, primarily the banking sector operates on the common law grounds. But when it comes to specific products or a background operation or back office operation, they have to follow the Islamic laws. What we've seen in the traditional market, Islamic laws and common laws have coexisted together. As we see Islamic banks operating in European segments and international trade businesses. So yes, the key products and services differences would be more on the operational side, as we've seen in the contractual obligations within the products and services. But these do coexist in the market, and it should be the same for fintechs as well.
So quickly, one more question, and then we wrap up. And the last question is that basically, what are the barriers for banks in Muslim countries to work with fintechs? I mean, Meaghan, would you like to answer?
I may pass that because I'm not hyper close to
Fantastic. I would certainly take, I would answer that, and then I'll head towards closure. So basically, the barriers for banks in Muslim countries are none when it comes to working with fintechs. The only barrier is the same barrier that is similar to what is happening in other countries. So be that Islamic finance or be that the conventional banking system, what would, the major impediments that basically hold, any fintech to work with the bank is a couple of things. Number one, their approach to the bank. Number two is going to be, what are they offering? Is it something relevant to the bank or not? Number three is that what is the quality of the technology that they're proposing to the bank, right? So you see, let's be fair on the banking side as well. Banks would not want to engage with something that may expose their systems to something that is not as per the quality services, or as that is not actually having the quality APIs that they expect to basically ensure the data is secure and the right people have access to the systems. That's one of the important things. On the side of the impediments that fintechs also face is also that the mindset. Some of the banks still have the mindset that we will build it inside, we will build it internally, and some of them would not be able to understand what the proposition is all about. That is why you have the rise of new challenger banks and new neobanks and new fintechs that are emerging in different places in different parts of the world. So I wouldn't really say that a Muslim country would have any specific barrier. No, I think the barriers to work with the bank are the similar globally. It's not basically specific to a Muslim or a non-Muslim country, one. And number two is that the Islamic fintech space, before we conclude, is tremendous. I think we are at that curve where Islamic finance has, historically struggled to keep up with the pace of the conventional banking system or the conventional finance system. Right now, you have that edge, where you can actually, leapfrog and come neck to neck with the existing conventional system and take upper hand by offering propositions and services that today are accepted and adopted by many. A good example would be the traditional insurance, and then we had Lemonade that was launched in the US. And Lemonade is very, very similar to what an Islamic takaful insurance is. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is how I would sum it up. I would like to thank Meaghan, Sulaiman, Raheel for taking out their precious time and coming over here and sharing the point of views, sharing their insights and inputs. It's always very valuable learning from you all. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to us as well. We hope that we were able to add great value to you. If not, we're always available. I'm sure all of these experts are available via LinkedIn. You can reach out to them, have a conversation, engage with them, and continue your learning. It was a pleasure speaking to you all. Signing out from Dubai. Have a good month.
And thank you to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Maher. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks,
Amir.
Meaghan. Thanks,
Great
Raheel.
insights, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.